Detective Ethan Cross had always believed he understood fair until the night rookie officer Maya Sterling vanished on a routine patrol, leaving nothing but a smear of wet fingerprints on her patrol car. Sergeant Liam Hawke warned me to stay away from the abandoned district, but curiosity pulled me in anyway. That's when the whispers began, voices over the static, calling my name. The city itself seemed to watch, waiting for me to make the next mistake. By the time I realized the pattern, it was too late. The streets weren't empty, the shadows weren't alone, and the next patrol car that stopped might belong to me. The first night I wore the uniform, I felt a strange weight settle on my shoulders, heavier than the badge itself. The precinct had the smell of damp concrete, stale coffee, and something faintly metallic that I couldn't quite place. The old walls were lined with photographs of past officers, their black and white eyes following me no matter where I walked. They weren't smiling, none of them. Their faces were frozen in stern silence, and as I passed them it felt like I was being judged for stepping into their world. My sergeant handed me the keys to a patrol car and told me I'd be covering the night shift in the old industrial district. He didn't say much else, and his eyes lingered on me a second too long, like he knew something I didn't. When I stepped outside, the night air felt thick, clinging to my skin like mist that refused to lift. I got into the car, its engine rumbling low, the dashboard lights glowing in faint green. I drove through empty streets, the radio hissing with static, occasionally bursting with fragmented words that I couldn't make out. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The street lights flickered overhead as if they were straining to stay alive, their pale glow cutting through patches of fog that rolled lazily across the asphalt. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself this was just another neighborhood, just another shift, but deep down, I could feel something wasn't right. The buildings here were husks, hollow reminders of a city that had given up on this place long ago. Windows were boarded shut, doors locked with chains, paint peeling in strips like old scabs. I drove slowly, scanning alleys and sidewalks, but nothing moved. Not even a stray dog or a passing car. The silence pressed against my ears until I turned the radio up just to have some kind of noise. But the static only made it worse, like voices were trying to push through, whispering things I wasn't meant to hear. Around midnight I pulled up outside a closed factory. The building loomed against the sky, its broken windows gaping like blackened teeth. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs, trying to shake off the growing unease. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked a few steps forward, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the mist, trembling slightly because my hands wouldn't stay steady. I swept it across the lot, over rusted machinery and piles of debris, but nothing stirred. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it. A single handprint smeared across the driver's side window of my patrol car. It was pressed hard into the glass, the fingers spread unnaturally wide. I froze, staring at it, my chest tightening. I knew it hadn't been there when I stepped out. The glass gleamed faintly under the streetlight, and the print looked wet, fresh, like someone had just pressed their palm against it seconds ago. My flashlight shook harder, the beam bouncing across the ground. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the factory lot, the empty street, the shadows beneath the flickering lamps. Nothing. Not a sound, not a shape moving in the dark. The mist hung heavy, but it wasn't thick enough to hide anyone nearby. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat louder than the silence around me. I told myself it was a prank, maybe something left on the window earlier. But the truth burned in the back of my mind. There had been no handprint when I got out. Someone had been close enough to touch the car. Someone had been close enough to watch me. I forced myself back toward the vehicle, each step slower than the last. I gripped the door handle and glanced once more over my shoulder, but the lot remained empty, silent as the grave. I climbed into the driver's seat, shutting the door with more force than I meant to. The familiar space of the car should have brought comfort, but instead, it felt like a trap, like the air inside was heavier than it had been before. My breath fogged the windshield as I leaned forward, trying to calm myself. That's when I saw it. On the inside of the glass, directly across from my face, was another handprint. This one smeared downward, as though someone had pressed their palm against it from the passenger seat and dragged their fingers slowly down toward the dashboard. The moisture glistened faintly in the glow of the streetlight. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The handprint was fresh, impossibly fresh, and I had been out of the car the whole time. When I finally tore my eyes away from the glass and glanced at the rearview mirror, the back seat was nothing but shadows. And yet I couldn't shake the certainty that I wasn't alone. I didn't file a report about the handprints. How could I? What would I even say that someone managed to sneak up on me, leave prints outside and inside my car, and vanish without a trace? They'd laugh at me, or worse, they'd start to doubt if I was fit for the job. So I told myself it was nothing, that my nerves were just raw from being out here in the dark for the first time. But deep down, I knew better. Something had touched that glass, something had sat where no one should have been, and it was following me still. The next night I tried to shake the unease. I told myself to stay sharp, to keep my head clear, to ignore the tricks my eyes and ears wanted to play on me. But as soon as I slid into the patrol car, the air felt heavier. The engine turned over, the The radio crackled with static, and the silence outside pressed itself into the windows. I drove slowly, every corner, every dark alley pulling at me like open mouths waiting to swallow me whole. The radio hissed and popped, a broken lifeline to the world beyond this empty district. For hours, it was the same white noise, faint bursts of sound too broken to make sense. But then, as I passed a row of shuttered storefronts, I heard it clearly for the first time. A voice buried under the static, whispering. The words weren't clear, but they carried a rhythm, soft and urgent, like someone begging from the other side of a wall. I leaned closer to the radio, straining to hear, but as quickly as it came, it was gone again, swallowed back into the noise. The streets stretched on endlessly, empty and forgotten. Neon signs flickered half-heartedly in the distance, their colors bleeding weakly into the fog. That's when I saw the motel. Its paint was peeling, the sign hanging crooked, buzzing faintly with the word vacancy stuttering in and out like a dying breath. The parking lot was nearly deserted, just a scattering of old cars that looked abandoned more than parked. I slowed as I passed, my headlights sweeping across the building's facade. Every single window was sealed by drawn curtains. Every single one except for room 6. The curtains there hung slightly apart, leaving a narrow slit of visibility. My pulse quickened as I caught the faintest glow of light inside. Someone was awake, pacing back and forth. A shadow moved slowly across that gap, crossing and then returning, like an animal trapped in a cage. I sat frozen, my eyes locked on the thin space between those curtains. The figure moved again, closer this time, stopping just at the edge of the opening. My skin prickled, and I leaned forward against the wheel. I couldn't see a face, couldn't make out details, only the outline of someone standing, waiting, watching. The moment stretched into silence so thick it seemed to smother the air in my lungs. And then, without warning, the light in the room cut out. 1 second, the glow was there, the shadow swaying behind it. The next, total darkness. The window was nothing but a blank square of glass. I blinked, startled, trying to adjust, and that's when the reflection caught my eye. The neon motel sign should have been reflected in the glass, flickering its red glow against the surface, but it wasn't there. Instead, what I saw was my patrol car, its headlights glaring back at me. My car, parked in the lot, captured in the reflection as clear as day. And leaning against the driver's side door was a figure, a dark silhouette, bent slightly, like someone resting casually against the metal. My stomach dropped as cold dread gripped me. My head snapped toward the car, my eyes darting to the side mirror, to the lot around me. Nothing. The space was empty, silent except for the hum of the motel's dying sign. I turned back to the window, but the reflection was gone too. Just a dark, empty room with the curtains drawn tight again, hiding whatever had been inside. My fingers tightened on the wheel, sweat slicking my palms despite the cold air. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity, staring into the shadows around me, waiting for anything to happen. Finally, I forced myself to press down on the gas. The car rolled forward, the motel sliding away in my rearview mirror. But the reflection in that window had burned itself into my mind, etched there like a scar. I knew what I'd seen, a figure leaning against my car, watching me from the glass of a room that was no longer lit. And though I tried to shake it off, I couldn't help but feel that I hadn't left the motel behind at all. Something had followed me out. I could not sleep after the motel. Every creak sounded like footsteps, every distant horn like a call that might be for me. At dawn I lay awake with the image of my car and a dark figure leaning against it. I meant to be practical, review the files, check cameras, report the handprints. The words never came. Pride and a small fear of being thought weak stopped me. At the station, the sergeant slid a bundle of old case files across the desk. The folders smelled of dust and coffee. I opened one in a corner and found photographs that felt like a cold hand. There was the factory lot, the same angle I had walked that night. In the picture, a patrol car sat where mine had been, and the window showed a wet handprint. The caption dated it years earlier. The report said the unit had been found abandoned, the officer missing. Another page showed the motel. Room 6 appeared in a photograph with curtains parted and a dark blur inside. Guests had complained of noises and tapping, of shadows crossing behind the glass. An officer had gone in to check and never returned to his beat. The official notes were calm and tidy. The images were not. They kept showing the same sheen on windows, the same smear of moisture where a palm had pressed. I traced the pattern like a map. Missing officers, cold cars, handprints appearing on glass and steering wheels, different names and dates folded into the same outline. The more I read, the less solid the world seemed. Reports saying no sign of foul play, while photographs hinted at something deliberate and patient. Each file cranked the knot tighter in my chest. That night the radio carried a rhythm, not words but a knock-like pulse through static. I followed it, driving until the signal felt like it came from the pavement itself. At an intersection, a patrol car sat, doors open, dust on the seats. The steering wheel, though, was a ring of print solder, smudges dark with age and newer ones glossy with damp. A smear on the dash blinked like a small correct eye. My training said secure the scene and call it in. Instinct said move away. My feet moved forward anyway. When my fingers brushed the wheel, a pressure pushed into my palm, as if a second hand matched mine from the other side. I jerked back and looked down. My own hand carried a faint print that was not mine. The radio hummed a tone that could have been a name. New prints began to appear, as if someone were tracing lines I was meant to read. A crescent on the mirror, a smear across the doorframe, an arc on the headliner. Rain pounded harder, carving narrow trails from the freshest marks. Each tiny stream pooled into darker beads that caught streetlight like wet eyes. It felt personal. The old files were not random. They were steps in a choreography I had stumbled into. Fear settled tight and precise in my gut. I pictured my own face in an archival frame, a date stamped below, and a blank where any further detail should be. I left before dawn because staying felt like accepting an appointment. As I pulled away, the car hunched in the rain, its wet lines like veins. The folder on the passenger seat shifted, as if nudged. When I glanced in the rear view, a fresh smear glinted on the windshield, small and deliberate like a thumb. A cold clarity struck me then. The pattern was not finished, and I had been made its next mark. Sleep stayed distant the next day. Sunlight felt thin and fragile because knowledge now weighed on me. Each static whisper on the radio brought back the pressure on my palm, and my skin prickled as if something lingered there. I hesitated to ask for help, torn between shame and the pull of facts that needed facing. Yet despite dread, I felt a tug toward those intersections and motel windows. When night fell, I drove back to the corner as if drawn by a hand. I tried to get reassigned, begged quietly for a different route, but my requests seemed to disappear before they were even heard. The night shift in that district clung to me like a curse. Other officers looked away when I brought it up, their silence more telling than words. It was as though they all knew but had chosen to let me sink into it alone. The district was a place nobody wanted, a graveyard of streets, and I was its unwilling caretaker. The air that night was thick and restless. I drove slowly, watching every alley, every flickering light. The radio had been my companion in the silence, though now it felt more like a trap. Static hissed, growing louder at odd intervals, like someone adjusting the volume just out of sight. For an hour there was nothing unusual, just the empty blocks rolling past. Then the message broke through. Officer down. The voice was sharp but distorted, buried under static, repeating again and again. It didn't match any dispatcher I recognized. My pulse quickened as I leaned toward the radio, waiting for confirmation, a unit number, a location. Nothing came. Just the same phrase repeated with mechanical insistence. Officer down. The air in the car felt heavier with every repetition, as though the words were pressing against the glass, trying to get in. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, scanning the dark streets ahead, and then the radio cut out entirely. Silence fell. That silence was worse than the voice, like the city itself was holding its breath. I turned down an intersection I had never patrolled before. The mist opened onto a scene that made my stomach twist. Parked in the middle of the road was another patrol car. Its doors hung open wide, rain pooling inside on the seats. Dust coated the exterior in a thick layer, as though it had been abandoned for years, but the engine was still running, headlights blazing white into the fog. I pulled up slowly behind it, stepping out into the damp night. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting as I breathed. My flashlight cut across the interior. The seats were empty, no signs of struggle, no blood, no personal belongings left behind. Just the dust. That, and the prints. The steering wheel was covered in handprints, layer upon layer of them, smeared in every direction. Some looked faded, pale gray, worn into the leather over time. Others were fresh, dark with moisture, glistening faintly in my light. They overlapped like 100 desperate attempts to hold on. My breath caught when I realized they weren't just old prints, they were still forming. As I watched, a new one appeared. The leather depressed, the faint impression of fingers pressing down hard, shaping into a hand that wasn't there. My chest tightened. The print grew darker as condensation bloomed across the wheel, wet and new. I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The driver's side mirror caught my eye, and I froze. In its reflection, I wasn't alone. A shape sat in the passenger seat, still and heavy, its outline blurred by the rain on the glass. My heart stopped. I snapped the light toward the seat, but it was empty, only shadows and damp fabric. I turned back to the mirror, and the shape was gone too, but the condensation on the window still bore the trace of a face pressed against it, nose and mouth leaving faint, wet outlines. My own breath came faster, fogging the glass of my flashlight lens. The radio inside my car suddenly burst to life again, louder than before, shrieking static into the night. I sprinted back, slamming the door shut behind me, gripping the wheel as though it would keep me tethered to reality. The voice came again through the crackling storm of sound. Officer down. This time, though, it was followed by something new. A whisper stretched and broken, repeating a number, my badge number, over and over, weaving between the static. I stared at the patrol car in front of me, its headlights cutting through the mist. The driver's side door creaked open wider with a sound sharp as a scream. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The prints on the steering wheel seemed to pulse, damp and living, as though dozens of unseen hands were waiting for mine to join them. And in that moment, I realized the calls weren't a warning. They weren't about another officer. They were about me. I don't know how many nights I've been driving these empty streets. Time has a strange way of stretching here, each shift bleeding into the next like one long nightmare. The city feels smaller now, as though the buildings themselves have closed in, pressing their shadowed walls against my car. Streetlights flicker in weak patterns, some burning out entirely, leaving me in pockets of darkness that feels solid and waiting. Every corner, every alley feels like it's watching, like something is moving just out of sight, staying ahead of me but never letting me leave. The radio no longer carries voices I recognize. There are no dispatchers, no other officers, just whispers that seem to coil around my skull. They repeat my name over and over, like a chant, soft at first, then loud enough to thrum in my chest. I grip the wheel tighter, but the sound doesn't stop. Even if I pull over and shut off the engine, it continues, like it is coming from inside me. Last night I returned to the station hoping for answers, or at least for a brief moment of reality. The building stood silent, empty, more massive than I remembered. The lights flickered overhead in a staccato rhythm, throwing shadows that moved without cause. I walked past a wall of photographs, past the faces of officers who had served before me, all of them frozen in black and white judgment. But then I saw something new. There, hanging on the wall, was my own photograph. I froze. The frame was black and polished, the glass smudged with faint moisture. My name was printed beneath the image, crisp and official. I had never seen this before, yet somehow it belonged. My stomach dropped as I realized I had become part of the lineage of missing officers, the same chain of faces trapped in photographs for the next shift to discover. I turned to leave, but the hallways were no longer familiar. Doors I knew led to nowhere, corridors stretched longer than possible, and shadows pooled at the edges of the light. The photographs multiplied as I walked, new frames appearing with every step. Faces I did not recognize stared at me, all pale eyes and frozen mouths. They lined the walls, hundreds of them, each face pressed into a silent, watchful scream. I tried to run. Every door I opened led me back into the same hall, the same walls, the same faces. The whispers followed, rising into a chorus that pressed against my ears and chest. My breath came in ragged bursts, mist forming in the cold, stagnant air. Each frame seemed to pulse with life, the eyes shifting slightly, following me. I stumbled over the carpet, my hands shaking, clawing at the walls as though I could tear a hole into some reality beyond this endless loop. The radio, once a tool of communication, now screamed a distorted version of my own name. I pressed my ears to it, hoping for clarity, but all it did was twist the sound into a slow, haunting melody. I realized then that the missing officers hadn't disappeared. They had become part of the station itself, their faces, their presence, their fears trapped in this labyrinth of walls and shadows, and now I was next. I tried to leave again, throwing open the nearest door. Beyond it was another hall, lined with photographs. I stopped. Handprint appeared on the glass of my own photograph, wet, fresh, pressed from the inside. I recoiled, stepping back, but the print did not fade. It glistened faintly in the dim light, and I knew without thinking that it was mine, that I had pressed it there unknowingly, drawn into this eternal pattern. The whispers rose to a scream, the air thick with cold and pressure. I stumbled through the corridors, past faces I could never forget, feeling invisible hands brush against my arms, my shoulders, guiding me, holding me, pulling me into the wall of photographs, and then, just as suddenly, silence fell. I am here now, alone, or so it seems. The station stretches endlessly, the photographs multiplying around me. The whispers have faded into a soft murmur, but I know they are waiting, patient, watching. The handprint on my photograph glistens faintly in the dark, and I understand with a sick clarity, I will never leave. Somewhere far away, my patrol car waits in the mist, and if I turn my head, I swear I see a figure leaning against it, just as it did the first night, a dark silhouette, waiting. The city is silent, but it is not empty, and I know this. The next officer who comes here will see my face on the wall, and the cycle will continue. The station breathes around me, and I am a part of it now, trapped in its corridors. My name whispered into the radio for all the nights to come. The last thing I see before the lights flicker out completely is a new handprint, pressing against the glass of the frame before me, wet, deliberate, and waiting. The city has claimed me, and it is patient.